Capital Views is sponsored by Northrim Bank, Alaska Oil and Gas Association, ConocoPhillips, and Linden.
Hi, I'm Tim Bradner with the Alaska Legislative Digest, and welcome today to Capitol Views, and a special welcome to Jared Kosin, CEO of the Alaska Hospital and Healthcare Association. So thanks for joining us, Jared.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I'm happy to be here.
Jared, one of the most important things that people think about these days in coming out of COVID is what's happened to our hospital and healthcare workforce. We hear a lot about nursing shortages and staffing shortages, difficulty in recruitment, and what we're past COVID in theory anyway. What's happened to the workforce? How are we doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Healthcare, you always have to start. Healthcare is so complicated. And so when we're starting to look at, what are the main issues pressing us, workforce continues to be a critical pressure point for us. But there are so many others as we evolve beyond, the pandemic and beyond kind of what we've experienced over the last few years. But like many other states, we have worker shortages. We have worker shortages in certain disciplines that are really needed within healthcare, within our facilities and elsewhere. And it's a problem that requires a real long-term strategy that we collectively as an industry are working on. But then individually, we are also kind of working on these different strategies to recruit, retain, and support our existing workforce. And so we see it both kind of outside of the political world, and then, of course, inside the political world as we all grapple on different solutions we can participate in.
Jared, is there any particular occupation that there's a problem? We've heard about nursing.
Yeah,
Nurses.
so nursing, when you think of healthcare, there are certain positions that rise to the top. To answer your question really directly, virtually every position in healthcare in Alaska has a shortage. And sure, there are going to be some outliers that are at baseline, but generally speaking, we're experiencing shortages around every position we need. But when you think of the dominant positions, typically in healthcare, you start thinking of medical providers, but naturally you also think of nurses. And so if you start to hone in on that dominant position of nursing, we have huge shortages. In Alaska, every year to keep up with growth and churn, we have to find almost 1,400 new nurse recruits to make ourselves whole to deliver healthcare across the industry in our state. And so if you think of that whole of 1,400, how are we doing on that? If you look locally at how many nurses we're producing through our educational institutions and programs, we're only producing like 324, 325 from our local programs. So if you look at that compared to the true whole, which is close to 1,400, we're not even providing an in-state trained workforce that is even a quarter of what is needed on an annual basis. So we see a lot of struggles in the nursing profession in healthcare in terms of people needed and strategies being deployed to try and develop that kind of local pipeline, but also augment it with others who can really step in and help us.
But Jared, how are we filling that gap?
Well, it's really you make do as best as you can. So you see a lot of pressure points within our facilities and elsewhere. You learn how to kind of deliver care with that gap in place. But more importantly, we see a lot of aggressive strategies trying to recruit not only every single nurse that comes out of these in-state programs. We want to keep them here, but we're also recruiting from out of state because we have so many openings. And I'm not talking recruiting people on temporary assignment. I'm talking we're trying to recruit anybody and everybody who's qualified to be here for the long term. So you see a lot of aggressive strategies to try and pull people from the lower 48. If we have travelers that are kind of on temporary assignment in our facilities, we're trying to convert them into permanent. That's an interesting statistic actually for us in healthcare. 1 in 5 healthcare workers that come to Alaska temporarily, 1 in 5 of them stay permanently. And so that's what I'm saying, where you kind of have to look in state and out of state to try and fill this hole.
But travelers are pretty expensive, Jared. What What do they cost? What
Yeah,
are the
they're extremely expensive. We have a great healthcare report that details all this dollar for dollar on our website at Alaska HHA.org. If you just go to the workforce tab, we have all the statistics broken out. But I think that is what the interesting thing for us is. Everyone thinks there's this natural desire to try and import a bunch of traveling nurses, and that will solve our problem. Far from it. That's the most expensive workforce that you can try and identify. So we actually want to move away from that and try and develop talent locally. But also, anyone we're recruiting from out of state, we want to recruit them for the long haul. So, yeah, travelers are extremely expensive, far more expensive than having people in permanent positions.
Jared, what's the issue? Why can't we build up our in-state production?
It's challenging. It comes down to needing more nurse educators. It comes down to needing more spots within these programs, which is not as simple as adding chairs. You know, these things get complex. So it's a pretty multifaceted problem. Uh, Things that really require that kind of long-term solution, that long-term thinking, and those are the conversations we're having with these entities and trying to develop. I think the other thing that we don't do ourselves any favors on are what are some of the easier things that we can do that we see in other states to try and make it easier for people to come here to be nurses and stay here as nurses. And one thing we continue to see out of state that is being picked up by states is licensing. Can we have an efficient licensing process that doesn't take months to license a nurse to practice up here? And the answer is yes. We see in the lower 48 now 42 states and jurisdictions all have come together and do reciprocity for licensure through what's called the Nurse Licensure Compact. 42 states and jurisdictions in the lower 48 now do this. And that allows nurses to basically have the freedom to move where they want under a single license, under a very strict set of standards. And so Alaska has the potential to do that. That's something we've been talking about with the legislature for years, and would be a very easy way to, again, make it easier and show we're kind of open for business to welcome nurses into our ranks and to be here permanently.
Jared, just looking at the time of processing a nurse application,
Yeah.
how long does it take?
Right now, I know the department, I think they're at about a month. I think the last I heard is 4 to 5 weeks, which is far better than the 8 to 12 to 16 weeks it was before. But 4 weeks to get a license when you could go virtually anywhere for that job, 4 weeks when you get hired that you have to wait to start a job, that's how you lose applicants. That's how we lose applicants in other positions outside of nursing. So 4 weeks, that's great. We're really happy it's getting better, but 4 weeks is too long. If we were to follow reciprocity like the rest of the country does, we could take that 4 week backlog and turn it into a matter of 1 or 2 weeks, a much more palatable timeline than we see in other states for getting people licensed.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of challenges, and Jared, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll be talking again. Uh,
Great,
thank
Tim. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to it.